Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I didn't expect a simple Saturday walk to tangle itself around my heart, but it did, quietly, the way a vine finds a fence and decides to stay. My grandson Luke had asked for an adventure. I said yes, thinking it meant ice cream and a loop around the lake. I didn't realize the adventure would be in my own mind and in what I thought I knew about people. We set out just after lunch, when the sun was gentle and the sidewalks still held a little heat. Luke's hand tugged at mine, his palm small and warm, fingers sticky from the slice of orange he'd insisted on bringing in his pocket. The neighborhood looked almost new in that soft light, porches with hanging ferns, flags stitched with stories I'd never learn, and a hush that comes after church bells and before dinner pots. I told Luke we would follow the cracked sidewalk like a treasure map. Every crack, I said, is a clue that someone heavy once stood here, or that the earth had shrugged beneath us when we weren't looking. He liked that. He hopped from square to square, narrating the way kids do. This one is lava, that one's safe. This one the bridge to an island where we only speak in whispers. I matched his pace, my knees protesting then settling, and felt a familiar pride. I still had enough stride left to keep up with a 7-year-old and enough patience to answer every question. We turned onto Oak Street, where the bakery pushes out its warm breath through the vents and the pigeons line up like loyal customers. As we passed, the baker waved and Luke waved back with both arms, like he was sending off a ship. The park came into view the way a memory does, suddenly and with detail. The pond wore sunlight like a shawl. A pair of ducks left calligraphy on the surface. The walking path had a slow, sensible bend to it, the kind that seems designed for grandparents. We took it. Luke kept up a running commentary about which dog he'd adopt if I let him choose any dog in the world. The third candidate was a beagle named Detective, which made perfect sense to him and felt oddly perfect to me, too. We were halfway around when Luke's chatter went quiet. I felt it before I saw it. That pause, the solemnity that visits children when they stumble onto something new and uncertain. On a bench near the water sat a man with a cardboard sign propped against his knees. He was maybe my age, maybe younger. It's hard to tell sometimes. His beard was unkempt but clean, the kind of clean that looked recent and careful. The sign said, "Just need a hand getting back on my feet." The words were written in a tidy hand, like he'd taken a moment to steady the marker and choose his letters. Luke squeezed my fingers. "Grandma," he whispered, "do we look away or say hello?" It caught me. Not the question exactly, but the way he placed it in my lap, as if I knew the rules. A small tension opened in my chest, that old protective instinct standing at attention. I grew up in a house where we were told to dodge trouble, to cross streets, and keep moving. I was taught politeness like a coat you wear to keep out the cold, and I wore it faithfully for years. But the older I get, the more I wonder what warmth I've missed by buttoning it too tight. "We say hello," I said, hearing my voice sound braver than I felt. We approached slowly. The man looked up, and his eyes were the surprising part, not tired like I anticipated, not blank. Clear, steady, the color of the pond when clouds pass. He nodded. "Afternoon?" he said, and his voice carried a polite stiffness. It struck me that he, too, had been taught manners, perhaps by a mother who ironed shirts and said grace. "Afternoon," I replied. "It's a good day for a walk." "The best," he answered. "Good for thinking." Luke studied the sign without staring. He pulled the orange slice from his pocket and then, reconsidering, tucked it away again. "Are you finding your feet?" he asked, earnest as a pastor, and I felt a ripple of worry. Was he being too direct? But the man smiled, a careful smile that didn't reach for pity. Trying to, he said. I had a job and then didn't. Life is slippery sometimes. Life is slippery sometimes. The words slipped under my guard. I've been divorced for 15 years, and still there are mornings when the house feels like an empty theater after the final bow. Programs crumpled, stage lights cooling. I know about slippery. I wanted to offer something more than coins, but I didn't know what. My mind leaped to all the warnings I'd heard, all the stories told by people who'd never shaken this man's hand. "What's your name?" I asked. "Daniel," he said. "And you?" "Margaret," I told him. "This is my grandson Luke." Luke stuck out his hand, and the shake was solemn. "Detective Luke," he added, and Daniel laughed softly, as if careful not to disturb something fragile in the air. We talked for a minute about the ducks and the weather. It felt ordinary and also not ordinary at all, like stepping into a hallway you've passed 100 times and finding a window you never noticed. I saw that Daniel had patched elbows on his coat, that his shoes were scuffed but tied neatly, that he was sitting not slumped but upright, as if the bench had rules, and he was respecting them. I wanted to know his story, the real one, but I also knew stories asked to be invited out gently. "Grandma," Luke said, tugging me, "can we give him the oranges at home? We have lots." "Maybe we could bring something," I said to Daniel, testing the words. "If you'll be here tomorrow." "Most likely," he said. "There's a shelter down the road that opens at 5. I go there when I can, but the afternoon is quiet here, and I like the quiet." I nodded, thinking of my pantry and the soups I never make because cooking for one feels like math I no longer do. It occurred to me how simple changes shape a day. One hello, one orange, one promise. "We'll come by," I said, and my voice surprised me again, steady as a fence post. "If that's all right with you." "That would be kind," he said. He didn't overthank us. He let the offer stand on its own legs. We moved on down the path, Luke swinging our joined hands between us. The pond made the same small sounds it always makes, but something in me had shifted a degree or two, like a picture frame straightened by accident. We crossed a small wooden bridge. Luke made me stop and look at the minnows darting in the shadow. "Like punctuation," he said, and I laughed because he was right. People in sentences. We're both trying to say something. On the way out of the park, we passed a young couple arguing in low voices, a man jogging with knees so high it looked like a dance, a woman reading on the grass with her shoes beside her like obedient dogs. I realized how easily I sort people into tidy boxes, the way a kitchen drawer swallows rubber bands and batteries. Useful, but limiting. Daniel had been a box with a label I didn't choose but had accepted, and one polite conversation had peeled the label back. At the corner, the light changed and we waited, a little island of two. "Grandma," Luke said, "are we good people?" I thought about it, truly thought, while the cars rushed by, and the bakery let have another warm breath. "I think we're trying," I said, "and trying is the first step to being." He nodded, satisfied. "Can we make a list when we get home?" he asked. "Things we can bring. Soup, socks, maybe a book." "A book," I said, tasting the word. "Yes, a book." As we walked the last block, I counted my own assumptions like coins and put them away. The houses we passed looked less like scenery and more like lives. The wind lifted the scent of cut grass, and somewhere a radio played an old song I hadn't heard since before the divorce, a melody that used to make me feel young and now simply made me feel present. By the time we reached my front steps, Luke had composed our list out loud twice. I unlocked the door, and the house accepted us with its familiar creaks, and I found that I was looking forward to tomorrow in a way I hadn't in a long time, not for an event, but for a conversation continued. We set the oranges on the counter, and I rinsed our hands at the sink. The water ran clear and cool, and Luke leaned his forehead to my arm the way he did when he was younger. "Grandma," he said, today felt different. It did, I answered, drying my fingers slowly. Sometimes different is exactly what we need. That night I barely slept. Not because of worry, but because something inside my mind stayed wide awake, almost like a lamp that refused to turn off. I replayed that moment near the bench again and again. The way Daniel spoke gently, the way he didn't push for anything, the way his eyes stayed calm even though his situation must have been heavy in ways I couldn't fully understand. I kept thinking about how easy it is to walk past people, to categorize them, to assume a summary about someone based on one snapshot in time. And suddenly I realized that for years I had been doing exactly that, almost on autopilot. Maybe because life had worn me down, maybe because routines make us lazy thinkers, or maybe because it's comfortable to believe we already understand the world. But Luke, with his small hand and giant heart, had reminded me that the world never asked us to stop learning about each other. The next day we packed a small bag. Not too much, not too little. I wrapped 2 cans of chicken soup in cloth so they wouldn't clank. I placed socks in a neat stack because warm feet go a long way when the world is uncertain beneath you. And then I added a paperback book. I stood in front of my shelf longer than necessary, trying to choose the right one. I picked a novel I once read during a difficult winter. It had comforted me then. It felt right to offer comfort again, even if simply through worn pages and honest words. Luke walked beside me again, this time much quieter, like he understood that today was not a game, but a continuation of something meaningful. The park was as calm as the day before. The sun stretched itself over the pond like a lazy cat finding its warm spot. We followed the walkway, passing the same baker and the familiar pigeons, but everything felt slightly different, as if the path had decided to become part of our story too. Daniel was there. Same bench. Same upright posture. Same calm. This time his sign was resting beside him instead of propped up, almost like he was saving his energy. He looked up when he heard our footsteps, and he smiled, not surprised, but appreciative, like someone recognizing a familiar song. "You came back," he said. "We said we would," I replied. I placed the bag gently beside him. He didn't rush to open it. He simply nodded, a gesture that held more gratitude than a big speech ever could. Luke sat on the bench beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel laughed softly and said he was glad to have company. Luke asked if he liked stories, and Daniel said yes, especially ones where honesty wins. That sentence alone made me swallow hard. Honesty wins. What a simple phrase. And yet how many adults forget it? We talked longer this time. Not about problems or pity. Not about fixing anything or analyzing choices. We talked about people we miss, food we enjoy, and places we once traveled. Daniel shared that he used to work in small construction projects, porches, decks, fences. He said he liked building things people could sit on and talk around. There was something profound in that, though he said it casually. Before we left, Luke asked him, "Do you think strangers can change each other?" And Daniel said, "I believe they already do, long before they notice." On the way home, I found myself walking slower. I wanted the time between now and the front door to stretch out a little more. As we passed the bakery again, the air smelled of cinnamon and melted sugar. A mother was pushing a stroller, humming to her baby. A teenager on a bicycle rode by with a backpack full of unknown plans, and I realized I was seeing each person the way I had seen Daniel today, not as passing shapes, but as stories moving forward. By the time we reached home, something was settled inside me. A quiet understanding. People aren't puzzles. People are chapters. And we catch each other mid-page more often than at the beginning or the end. The third day felt almost like routine, but in a way that made me feel younger, not older. Morning coffee had a different taste to it, like I wasn't just passing time anymore. I found myself looking out the kitchen window more often, watching the street on purpose instead of just as background movement. I realized how rarely I'd slowed down enough to pay attention to the individual lives behind each window and driveway. I used to think I was observant, but maybe I'd only ever been scanning, not truly seeing. Luke got ready faster than usual, even brushing his hair without me reminding him. He asked if today we should write a list before we left. So we did. 2 bananas, another can of soup, and 2 bottles of cold water. And then Luke added one more thing to the list, in shaky little letters. Questions. He said we should bring questions because questions were more valuable than objects. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because there was so much truth in that tiny thought. We carried the bag like it held delicate items, and maybe it really did. The walk to the park felt like a familiar path now, but I noticed the curves differently. I noticed how the afternoon light changed certain colors into softer versions of themselves. The house with the blue porch swing looked less lonely today. The tall elm tree on the corner seemed to shrug against the light breeze, as if showing off. Even the pigeons looked more purposeful, as if they too were part of this quiet chain of moments. Daniel was there, on the same bench. But today he wasn't alone. A man around his age stood a few steps away, hands in pockets, and laughed politely at something Daniel said. They both turned when they saw us. Daniel waved. "Margaret," he said, as if saying my name grounded him for a moment. "This is a friend from the shelter. His name is Tom." We shook hands. Tom didn't sit long. He had somewhere to go. But I noticed how their brief conversation wasn't heavy. It felt like 2 people standing inside the same storm, but willing to keep each other dry for a few minutes. When he left, Luke climbed up on the bench again and rested his chin on his hands. "We brought questions," he said matter-of-factly, like he was announcing something official. Daniel smiled. "Questions are good. Better than answers sometimes." Luke asked if Daniel had always known how to build things. Daniel talked about being young and working with his father, learning how to hold wood steady, how to not rush screws, and how sometimes the best part of building anything is the conversations you have while doing it. He said his father believed every board had a personality, and that if you were patient, you could feel what direction it wanted to sit. There was an odd kind of poetry in that, and I found myself imagining my own life as pieces of wood being placed carefully at different moments. When Luke went to look at the ducks again, I stayed seated beside Daniel, silent for a moment. And then I said something that surprised me even more than it surprised him. "You know, I used to think people were either doing well or doing badly. But maybe most of us are somewhere in the middle, trying to keep steady." He nodded slowly. "Balance isn't a place," he said. "It's something you keep tending to." He said it so quietly that it felt like the air carried the words instead of his mouth. We didn't talk about pain. We didn't talk about fear. But somehow those things sat beside us anyway, like invisible guests we had agreed not to disturb. And there was comfort in that. When we stood to leave, Daniel thanked us, not for the soup or the bananas, but for returning. "Presence is a gift too," he said. "It stayed with me the whole walk back. I didn't realize how often people need someone simply to show up without trying to fix everything." On the final stretch home, Luke held my hand just a little tighter. "Grandma," he said softly, "I'm learning about people." And I whispered, "So am I." And for the first time in a long while, I felt like life wasn't just passing by me. I felt like I was finally participating again. The morning after our 3rd visit, the sky looked washed clean. The air had that crispness that only comes right before summer gives itself to fall. I prepared our small bag again, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper that had grown without me noticing. And this time, before leaving the house, I paused in the hallway and looked at my own reflection in the framed mirror. I studied my face, not to judge, but to recognize it. I thought about how many years I'd moved through life thinking I already understood the world. Yet here I was, learning that true understanding sometimes shows up from a wooden park bench beside a quiet pond. When we reached the park, Daniel wasn't in his usual spot. For a moment, a little worry moved through me, a quiet flicker, like a candle catching draft. Maybe he had been moved along, maybe he had left early, maybe life had shifted again overnight. Luke stood very still, scanning the benches and the walkway. He didn't panic, but his eyes looked older for a moment, like he'd discovered that stories don't always follow our plans neatly. We walked toward the ducks anyway, hoping. And then we heard someone call out. We turned, and there he was, standing under one of the tall trees, hands in his coat pockets, looking almost like someone waiting for an old friend to arrive. He waved, and we walked over. Daniel seemed brighter somehow. Not cheerful, just lighter. I might have something lined up, he said. A man I talked to at the shelter heard about a project rebuilding a porch a few streets away. Nothing certain yet, but possibility is something too, isn't it? The way he said that word, possibility, felt like a small doorway opening. Luke clapped his hands softly, and I felt a strange warmth move through me, as if witnessing the very beginning of hope. It reminded me of planting seeds with my daughters when they were small. The moment when the soil breaks open isn't loud. It's almost invisible, yet you feel it. We didn't stay long that day. Something in me wanted to give Daniel space, to let his next chapter unfold without us holding too tight to the present one. Before we turned to leave, he said something I will never forget. He looked at Luke first, then at me, and said, "Sometimes the hardest part of life isn't the losing. It's remembering you're still allowed to start again." On the walk home, I could feel the weight of that sentence. I held it like a folded letter inside my thoughts. At each step, I realized this. There is a quiet dignity in acknowledging that life doesn't lock any of us into one fixed version of who we are. People change. People fall. People rise again. And sometimes the rise starts with nothing more than eye contact and a simple hello. When we reached my front door, Luke leaned against my arm. "Do you think we'll see him again?" he asked, voice steady but curious. I told him honestly, maybe. Maybe not. But what matters is that we saw him truly while we could. We went inside, and the house didn't feel quite as empty as usual. It felt fuller, warmer. I poured myself tea and watched the steam rise like a quiet reminder that everything in life moves, shifts, and reshapes itself. Maybe the best part of that walk wasn't the act of giving things. Maybe the real gift was receiving a new way to look at strangers, at stories, at second chances. Sometimes the most meaningful changes don't arrive loudly. Sometimes they come in the form of a grandson's questions, a man on a bench, and the gentle realization that every person you pass might be balancing something invisible. That simple walk didn't change the world, but it changed the way I live inside it. And sometimes that is where the greatest change begins.